Have you ever loved someone so much that the thought of them being anything other than perfect was simply impossible? That's how I felt about Vincent.
And my Vincent?
He wasn't just my fiancé. He was a supernova in the bleak, quiet universe of my life.
In the tech world, he was a god.
His name, Vincent Sterling, was whispered in the same reverent tones as the titans who came before him. His creation, the V-Core battery, wasn't just an improvement, it was a quantum leap, a promise to unshackle the world from the wall socket. It was beautiful, it was revolutionary, and it was, I believed with every fiber of my being, his. And my family thought so too. To them, Vincent wasn't just a good match, he was a redemption. My father, Arthur Vance, was a brilliant man. He was a man who saw the world in schematics and energy transfer rates. His brain hummed with a current nobody else could quite tune into. But in the eyes of the world, and especially in the eyes of my mother, Eleanor, and my brother, Marcus, he was a failure. He was the man who spent decades in our dusty, ozone-scented garage, chasing patents that never materialized, pouring our meager savings into projects that sputtered and died. When he passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, the grief was there, but it was laced with a quiet, shameful sense of relief from my family. The dreamer was gone. It was time for pragmatism. And then came Vincent. He was everything my father wasn't: polished, celebrated, and most importantly, successful. He swooped into our lives with a bright, easy charm and a portfolio of achievements that made my mother's eyes gleam with a pride I'd never seen her show my dad. He'd listen, rapt, as my mother recounted tales of my difficult upbringing, shadowed by a father obsessed with his workbench. He'd clap my brother Marcus on the back, promising him a cushy executive role in his new company, a promise that made Marcus, who had coasted through life on a wave of parental indulgence, practically vibrate with unearned glee. They loved him. They loved him because he was winning the game my father had so spectacularly lost, and I loved him because I thought he saw me, Alyssa, not just the daughter of a failed inventor, but someone worthy of his brilliant world. I was so wrong. The beginning of the end started with a stack of papers. Vincent was in the final, frantic stages of preparing his patent application for the V-Core. The deadline was looming, and the entire tech industry was holding its breath. He was scheduled to announce the filing and unveil the final prototype at the Future Forward Tech Summit in 2 weeks. It was to be his coronation. He asked for my help organizing the technical appendices, a mountain of documents filled with complex equations and diagrams that would have been gibberish to most people. But I grew up at my father's elbow. I spoke the language of volts and amperes like it was my mother tongue. It was late, the house silent, except for the soft rustle of paper. Vincent was asleep upstairs, exhausted from a week of interviews and investor meetings. I was in his sleek, minimalist office, a place that always felt more like a showroom than a workspace. The air smelled of expensive leather and success. As I sorted the schematics, a particular diagram caught my eye. It was a power flow chart, elegant in its simplicity. It was familiar. A cold tingle, a strange sense of déjà vu, prickled at the back of my neck. I shook my head, dismissing it. Of course it felt familiar. Vincent had been talking about these concepts for months, but then I saw it. Tucked into the bottom corner of a dense, multi-layered schematic, almost hidden, was a small hand-drawn symbol. It was a tiny sketch of a lightning bolt contained within a circle, with a little bird perched on top. It was a doodle, a signature. My father's signature. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. It couldn't be. It was impossible. This was Vincent's office, Vincent's work. My father had been gone for 5 years, but I knew that symbol like I knew my own reflection. He'd drawn it on everything, from napkins to legal pads to the dusty corner of his workbench. It was his private mark, the brand of the Vance mind. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I started flipping through the pages with shaking hands. They weren't just similar to my dad's concepts, they were identical. The core architecture, the chemical composition of the electrolyte, the unique lattice structure of the anode, it was all his. It was the project he was working on when he died. the one he called Prometheus. He'd told me, his eyes wild with excitement, that it would change everything. I stumbled back from the desk, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. My mind raced. How could Vincent have this? Then a memory surfaced, cold and sharp. About a year ago, Vincent had offered to help me clean out the garage. My mother had been pressuring me for weeks to get rid of all that old junk. I had resisted, but Vincent, in his charming, helpful way, had insisted. We spent a weekend in that dusty mausoleum of my father's dreams. I had been emotional, nostalgic. Vincent had been so supportive, so kind. He'd held my hand and told me my father was a man ahead of his time. He'd asked questions about the old equipment, about the boxes of notes. I remembered with a sickening lurch, pointing to a metal case of old floppy disks. "That's the old stuff," I'd said, my voice thick with tears. "His whole life is probably on those things." Vincent had just nodded, his expression one of perfect, practiced sympathy. The papers in my hand were printouts, crisp, modern laser prints from a digital file. He must have taken a disk, one single forgotten floppy disk. I fled his office, his house, the life I thought was mine. I drove through the sleeping suburbs to the one place that felt real, my childhood home. I still had a key. Letting myself in, I bypassed my mother's pristine, sterile living room and went straight to the garage. The smell hit me first, that old familiar scent of solder, dust, and ozone. It was the smell of my father, my sanctuary. In the corner, under a dusty tarp, was his old computer tower, a beige, hulking thing from a bygone era. It was a miracle it was still there. My mother had probably forgotten about it. With frantic energy, I found the metal case of discs. My hands trembled as I sifted through them, the plastic labels brittle with age. And then I saw it. A disc, with a single word written in my father's spidery handwriting. Prometheus. I spent the next hour trying to get the old machine to boot up. The groans and clicks of the hard drive were the sounds of a ghost being resurrected. Finally, a pixelated desktop flickered to life. I slid the disk into the drive. The machine whirred, my breath caught in my throat. I clicked open the file directory. There they were, dozens of files, schematics, notes, chemical formulas, and at the bottom of the list, a simple text file named for Alyssa. I opened it. The screen filled with my father's words, a letter from beyond the grave. He talked about the project, about his hopes, his fears that he wouldn't live to see it finished. He wrote about his belief that energy should be for everyone, that it was the key to unlocking human potential. And then, the final paragraph. "My dearest Alyssa, you were always the brightest spark in my life. You understood this work in a way no one else ever did. If anything ever happens to me, this is yours. The legacy isn't in the invention itself, but in the spirit of it. Don't ever let anyone put a price on a dream." I stared at the screen, tears blurring the green text. Then I looked at the bottom right corner of the monitor. The system clock was wrong, of course, but the file properties were not. I right-clicked on the core schematic file, the very heart of the V-core. The timestamp was immutable, burned into the digital fabric of the disk. Created October 14th, 7 years ago. Last modified, the day before my father died. The proof was absolute. Vincent Sterling, the toast of the tech world, my fiancé, the man my family adored, was a fraud. He was a grave robber. He hadn't just stolen a project, he had stolen my father's soul, and he was about to sell it to the world as his own. I sat there on the cold concrete floor of that dusty garage, the ghost of my father at my side, and the perfect, beautiful world Vincent had built for me shattered into a million pieces. The grief was a physical blow, a gaping wound in my chest. But as the sun began to rise, something else rose with it, a cold, quiet, and terrible resolve. He had picked the wrong person to betray. He had stolen from the wrong ghost. The drive back from my childhood home was a blur. The world outside my car windows seemed unreal, a painted backdrop for the roaring inferno in my mind. I clutched the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the old floppy disk sitting on the passenger seat, like a sacred relic. Every traffic light, Every billboard, every smiling face felt like a personal insult. How could the world just keep spinning when mine had been ripped from its axis? I parked in front of the immaculate modern house that I had, until yesterday, thought of as our future home. Now it looked like a mausoleum, a monument to a colossal lie. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. I couldn't breathe the same air as him. Couldn't look at the photographs on the walls. Us smiling, on a beach in Bali. Us toasting with champagne, the day he secured his first round of funding. Every memory was now tainted, a scene from a horror film, where I was the only one who didn't know the monster was standing right next to me. I drove to the one place I knew I could fall apart without judgment. Chloe opened her apartment door in a bathrobe, her hair a mess, a look of sleepy confusion on her face that quickly morphed into alarm. "Alyssa, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stumbled inside, the words tumbling out of me in a torrent of grief and rage. I told her everything. The schematic, the doodle, the garage, the floppy disk, the letter from my father. I finally broke down, my body racked with sobs that felt like they were being torn from the deepest part of my soul. It was the grief for my father. I'd never fully allowed myself to feel, tangled up with the fresh, raw agony of Vincent's betrayal. Chloe didn't say a word. She just held me, her hand rubbing soothing circles on my back. She let me cry until I was empty, until all that was left was a hollow, echoing calm. When I finally quieted, she pulled back, her eyes blazing with a protective fury that warmed me to the core. "That absolute son of a bitch," she said, her voice a low growl. "He didn't just steal an invention, Ailey. He preyed on your love for your dad. He used your grief as a cover to commit the perfect crime." "My family will never believe me," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "They worship him. They'll say I'm hysterical, that I'm just projecting my feelings about my dad onto him." "Of course they will," Chloe said, her tone sharp and certain. "Eleanor and Marcus don't value integrity. They value stock options. They chose the winner. You can't go to them. You can't go to him either. He'll just lie. He'll destroy that disc and gaslight you into thinking you're insane." She was right. A direct confrontation was a losing battle. Vincent was a master manipulator. He had manipulated investors, the media, my family, and me. He would turn my truth into a pathetic, grief-stricken fantasy. He'd paint me as the unstable daughter of a failed inventor, jealous of his success, and my own mother would be his star witness. As Chloe made coffee, my mind drifted back, sifting through the wreckage of my memories, searching for the red flags I had so willingly ignored. I remembered a conversation from early in our relationship. We were walking through a park, and I was talking about my dad. I told him about the Prometheus project, about how passionate he was. I described his vision of a world with cheap, abundant energy. Vincent had listened with that intense, focused gaze of his. He'd squeezed my hand and said, "It's a tragedy that geniuses like him are so often misunderstood. The world needs visionaries." At the time, I thought it was the most romantic, understanding thing anyone had ever said. Now, I saw it for what it was: reconnaissance. He was a corporate spy conducting reconnaissance on a dead man's heart. Then there was the weekend in the garage. The memory replayed in my head, now in horrifying slow motion. I saw him picking up the metal case of discs. He'd asked, so innocently, "Do you think there's anything important on these? We should probably check before we throw them out." I'd been too lost in my own sorrow to see the glint of avarice in his eyes. I'd just shaken my head. "I can't. It's too much." I remembered him patting my shoulder. "Don't worry, honey. I'll take care of it." He must have slipped the Prometheus disc into his pocket. Right then, a viper stealing a dragon's egg, while the nest was unguarded. He took care of it, all right. He took care of himself. And my family. Oh, my family. A flashback to a Christmas dinner 2 years ago came flooding back. Marcus was going on about his latest get-rich-quick scheme, something involving cryptocurrency, and my mother was listening with a hopeful, indulgent smile. I had just gotten a promotion at my architecture firm, a significant one. When I tried to share my news, my mother had waved her hand dismissively. "That's nice, dear," she'd said, before turning back to Marcus. "Now tell me more about these bitcoins." My success was nice. Her failure of a son's fantasy was a matter of intense interest. They had been priming me for this my whole life, teaching me that my worth was secondary, that my role was to be stable, supportive, and silent. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Vincent. "Morning, my love. Woke up and you were gone. Everything okay? Can't wait for you to see the final presentation deck. Our future is looking very, very bright. XX. Our future." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, the casual, possessive cruelty of it. He was building a future for us on the tombstone of my father. He was using my father's life's work to buy me a ring, a house, a life that was a complete and utter sham. That was it. That was the moment the grief and the shock and the sorrow coalesced into something else, something hard and clear and cold as ice. Chloe saw the shift in my eyes. "What is it?" she asked softly. "He called it our future," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "He's not just a thief. He's a colonizer. He's trying to rewrite my past and sell it back to me." I stood up and began to pace Chloe's small living room, a current of furious energy surging through me. The plan was no longer to just survive this. The plan was to win. He wanted a legacy. I would give him one. He wanted to be a titan of industry. I would make him a cautionary tale. It wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. Not yet. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the only thing I had left of my father, his name, and his dream. But as I paced, a darker thought began to form, a whisper from the most wounded part of my soul. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. "He's giving a keynote at the Future Forward Tech Summit in 2 weeks. I said, the plan beginning to form, sharp and brutal, in my mind. He's going to be on the biggest stage in his industry. He's going to be at the absolute pinnacle of his fraudulent life. Chloe's eyes widened as she understood. "You're not going to expose him before then?" "No," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. It felt alien and yet perfectly natural. "I'm going to give him everything he's ever wanted. I'm going to let him climb all the way to the sun, and then I'm going to melt his wings." The first call I made was not to a journalist or a litigator. It was to a woman named Evelyn DeLuca, a patent attorney, whose reputation was as formidable as her hourly rate. I didn't tell her my name. I presented a hypothetical case. "Let's say a person," I began, my voice steady, "has irrefutable time-stamped digital proof of prior art for a major invention that is about to be patented by another party. A party who acquired the data fraudulently." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her sharp, legal mind. "Irrefutable is a strong word," Miss DeLuca said, her voice crisp and professional. "But if this proof is what you say it is, verifiable, dated, and directly corresponding to the core claims of the new patent application, then the other party doesn't just have a patent problem, they have a fraud problem. When they sign that application, they are attesting under penalty of perjury that they are the original inventor. Lying on that document is a federal offense." A cold thrill went through me. His own ambition, his own signature on that page, would be the spring that snapped the trap shut. "This other party," she continued, "is he building a company around this technology?" "Yes," I said. "He's secured millions in venture capital, hired a team. The company is the talk of the town. Then the company is a house of cards built on a fraudulent foundation," she said simply. "Every investor contract, every employment agreement, is predicated on the legitimacy of that intellectual property. If the IP is proven to be stolen, the company is worthless. The investors would have grounds for a massive lawsuit to claw back every penny." I explained the rest of my situation, the family dynamic, the upcoming summit. I told her I didn't just want to expose the fraud, I wanted to reclaim the technology in my father's name. "That's more complex," she said, "but possible. We can establish your father's estate as the rightful owner of the intellectual property. We can file a challenge, but the timing needs to be perfect, and you'll need more than just an old floppy disk. You'll need a narrative. You'll need corroboration." Corroboration. My mind immediately went to Vincent's past. A man this brazen, this arrogant. This couldn't have been his first time. "Chloe," a research wizard, took on the task with grim enthusiasm. While I focused on the legal strategy with Miss DeLuca, Chloe went digging. She spent days in a digital rabbit hole, cross-referencing old university records, business filings, and archived articles from tech blogs. What she found was a pattern. Vincent's official bio was a masterpiece of fiction. He hadn't graduated with honors. He'd barely passed, and had been formally disciplined for plagiarism on his senior thesis. His first successful startup, a social scheduling app, wasn't his at all. He had an equal partner, a programmer named Ben Carter. According to a bitter, long-deleted blog post Chloe unearthed from the depths of the internet, Vincent had pushed Ben out right before a minor acquisition, rewriting the company's history to erase him completely, and taking all the credit and the meager payout for himself. Ben Carter, Chloe said, her eyes gleaming over her laptop screen. He's our guy. He's your corroborating witness. He can testify to Vincent's character, to his history of stealing credit and erasing partners. Finding Ben was surprisingly easy. He was working as a mid-level programmer for a bland insurance company in a different state. His own dreams of tech stardom apparently extinguished. I called him. I didn't lead with Vincent. I just said I was a researcher looking into early-era social media apps. The moment I mentioned the name of his old app, his voice turned to ice. I have nothing to say about that, he said, his tone flat and final. My name is Alyssa Vance, I said quietly, and I think Vincent Sterling did to you what he's trying to do to my father. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him breathing. Your father? Arthur Vance, I said. He was the true inventor of the V-core battery. Another silence, longer this time, then a dry, bitter laugh. Of course he was. Of course. That bastard has a positive genius for finding other people's genius and putting his own name on it. What do you need from me? Ben became our secret weapon. He was a man with a decade of buried resentment, and I had just handed him a shovel. He had saved everything: old emails, partnership agreements, even the original source code for their app that proved his contributions. He agreed to sign a sworn affidavit, and if necessary, to speak to the right journalist when the time came. With the legal and corroborative pieces falling into place, the final part of the plan began to solidify. Miss DeLuca, now fully retained and working with grim efficiency, set up a shell, limited liability company for me. It was named Vance Legacy Innovations. It was, for now, just a name on a piece of paper, a ghost company waiting to be born. Through this LLC, we drafted provisional employment offers for the key technical talent on Vincent's team. I knew their names. I had sat through dozens of dinners where Vincent boasted about the brilliant engineers he'd poached from his rivals. I reached out to the lead engineer, a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, a true visionary in materials science. I sent her an anonymous, encrypted email. I didn't reveal everything. I simply said, there is a dispute regarding the provenance of the V-core IP. We believe the current leadership of the company may be compromised. A new entity, led by the family of the original inventor, is prepared to take over and ensure the technology's integrity and the security of its core team. Stand by. It was a risk. She could have forwarded it straight to Vincent, but I was betting on a simple principle. Brilliant people are loyal to the work, not to the salesman. The hardest part of the entire operation was playing the role of the loving fiancé. I moved back into the house. I had to force myself to smile, to kiss him, to listen to his self-congratulatory monologues about his own brilliance. Every touch felt like a violation, every term of endearment a shard of glass in my ear. He was so wrapped up in his impending triumph that he barely noticed my detachment. He interpreted my quietness as awe, my distraction as the natural nervousness of a bride-to-be. You seem tense, honey, he said one evening, putting his arm around me as we stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Don't worry, after the summit, it's just us. We'll have the world at our feet. Anything you want, it's yours. I know, I said, my voice a perfect imitation of affection. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man I had loved, and felt nothing but a cold, clinical emptiness. Inside, I was thinking about my father's letter. Don't ever let anyone put a price on a dream. And Vincent was trying to buy me with my own father's soul. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. Meanwhile, my family was becoming a problem. My silence, my barely veiled coolness, had not gone unnoticed by them. My mother, Eleanor, called me daily. "Alyssa, what is going on with you?" she'd ask, her voice laced with that familiar tone of aggrieved disappointment. "This is the most important time in Vincent's life, in our lives. He's making this family's name mean something for the first time, and you're moping around like a thundercloud. Your father had his head in the clouds, but I expected you to have your feet on the ground. You need to be more supportive." The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. She was praising a thief for giving our family name meaning by stealing it from the very man she was disparaging. My brother, Marcus, was even worse. He sent a stream of texts. "Seriously, Ellie, what's your deal?" A typical one read, "Vincent is this close to making us all rich, and you're acting weird. Don't you dare screw this up for us. This is my one big shot." His one big shot. A shot he hadn't earned. A future he felt entitled to simply by proximity to a lie. Their pressure was a constant grating noise, but it only strengthened my resolve. They weren't just bystanders. They were co-conspirators in their own ignorance, so dazzled by the shine of success that they refused to check if the gold was real. They had made their choice long ago, when they decided my father's quiet brilliance was an embarrassment, and Vincent's loud charade was a virtue. They had no idea that the future they were so desperate to secure was about to be annihilated, and I was the one holding the detonator. The days leading up to the Future Forward Tech Summit were a masterclass in deception. On the outside, I was the picture of the doting, supportive partner. I helped Vincent rehearse his keynote, offering suggestions on his pacing and tone. I sat beside him during a fawning television interview, smiling placidly as he described his lonely years of tireless research. Each word was a fresh betrayal, and with each word, the ice in my veins grew thicker. I was a ghost haunting my own life, watching a play where I knew the tragic ending and everyone else was still enjoying the first act. I was meticulously preparing for the final scene. I had the original floppy disk secured in a safe deposit box. Miss DeLuca had arranged for a digital forensics expert to create a certified, court-admissible copy and a report verifying the file creation dates. This report, along with Ben Carter's sworn affidavit and a detailed timeline of Vincent's fraud, was compiled into a sleek, damning dossier. We made 10 copies. I chose my messenger carefully. Not a tabloid reporter who would sensationalize the story, but Sarah Jenkins, a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist from a major tech publication known for her ruthless dedication to the truth. I met her in a discreet coffee shop far from my usual haunts. I slid the dossier across the table. "Everything in there is verified," I told her, my voice low and steady. "But the story is embargoed. You can't publish a single word until you get a text from me with one word. Now." Sarah opened the folder. She read the first page, a summary of the allegations. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, widened slightly. She looked up at me, 100 questions in her gaze. "He's giving the keynote at the summit on Friday." "Yes," I said. "At the peak of his speech, when he's on top of the world." A slow smile, one of professional appreciation for a perfectly crafted kill shot, spread across her face. "I'll have my draft ready," she said, closing the folder. "I'll be in the audience." The final piece of the silent takeover involved Vincent's own company, Sterling Dynamics. Using the Vance Legacy Innovations LLC, Miss DeLuca and I had identified the 5 most critical members of his technical team, including the brilliant Dr. Eris Thorne. We knew from their employment contracts that they had golden handcuff clauses that vested a significant amount of stock options only after the public launch. They were tethered to the company's success. My anonymous email to Dr. Thorne had planted a seed of doubt. Now it was time to water it. The day before the summit, Miss DeLuca, acting on behalf of an unnamed stakeholder, sent a formal letter to each of the 5 engineers. It was carefully worded, not with threats, but with promises. It stated that in the event of a force majeure restructuring of leadership, Vance Legacy Innovations was prepared to immediately assume control, honor their existing salaries, and most importantly, offer them a new set of stock options in the new legally sound entity, options that would be worth something, unlike their current ones, which were tied to fraudulent IP and would soon be worthless. We were offering them a lifeboat before they even knew their ship was sinking. We didn't ask for a reply, we just gave them a choice, trusting their intelligence to lead them to the right conclusion. The true antagonist panic, however, came not from Vincent, who remained blissfully cocooned in his own ego, but from my family. My calculated distance had driven them into a frenzy. The night before the summit, they insisted on a family celebration dinner at a ridiculously expensive restaurant. The kind of place with white tablecloths so stiff they could stand on their own and waiters who spoke in hushed, reverent tones. My mother had ordered duck confit for the table, a rich, ostentatious dish she thought signified class. It was the antithesis of my father, who considered a perfectly grilled cheese sandwich a culinary triumph. Vincent was holding court, expansive and magnanimous in his triumph. He raised a glass of wine that cost more than my first car. To the future, he boomed, his eyes shining. To Sterling Dynamics, and to my beautiful Alyssa, who stood by me through all the hard work. We're going to build a dynasty. My brother Marcus was practically salivating. A dynasty. I love the sound of that. So Vince, about my role as chief of, whatever. Have you thought about my office? My mother beamed at Vincent, her face a mask of pure adoration. Oh Vincent, we are just so proud. It's such a blessing. After all those years of your father's, his little projects in the garage, to finally have a true genius in the family. That was it. The final casual desecration. The dismissal of my father's entire life as a little project. The word genius, applied to the thief who had plundered his grave. A perfect serene calm washed over me. The anger, the grief, it all fell away, leaving behind only the crystalline certainty of my purpose. I placed my napkin neatly on the table, and stood up. If you'll excuse me, I said, my voice even and cool. I have some things to prepare for tomorrow. Four heads swiveled towards me, their expressions a mixture of shock and irritation. Alyssa, sit down, my mother hissed, her smile frozen on her face. Don't make a scene. Vincent stood up, his charming facade slipping for the first time. A flicker of genuine confusion, and perhaps fear, crossed his face. Honey, what's wrong? Is this about your dad? I know this must be bringing up some complicated feelings for you, seeing me succeed where, he trailed off, realizing his mistake. He was trying to use my father against me, to weaponize my grief, one last time.
Hey,
Don't be so difficult, Alyssa. Marcus chimed in, his voice a petulant whine. You're ruining the mood. This is supposed to be a celebration. I didn't say a word. I simply looked at each of them. At my brother, the entitled parasite. At my mother, the shallow worshipper of success. And finally, at Vincent, the hollow man, the charismatic fraud. I let the silence hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Then without a word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. The flurry of texts and calls started before I even reached the door. I felt my phone vibrating in my purse. A frantic, desperate buzzing. Vincent, my mother, Marcus. I ignored them all. I walked out into the cool night air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The power had shifted. For my entire life, they had controlled me with guilt, with obligation, with their definition of love and family. But I was no longer playing their game. They were panicking because their most reliable asset, my compliance, had just been liquidated. They had no idea the crash was yet to come. The morning of the Future Forward Tech Summit was cold and brilliantly clear. I woke up feeling a profound and unnerving sense of peace. I chose my outfit with the care of a general preparing for battle. A tailored charcoal gray suit, sharp and severe, with a silk blouse the color of steel. I looked in the mirror and saw not the grieving daughter or the betrayed fiancé, but someone else. Someone forged in the fire of the last 2 weeks. Someone my father would have recognized. I ignored the dozens of frantic texts and voicemails that had accumulated overnight. Vincent's messages had morphed from confusion to anger to pleading. "Alyssa, what the hell is going on? Call me. We need to talk before I go on stage. Don't do this to me, to us." My mother's were arias of guilt and accusation. "How could you walk out like that? You embarrassed us all. Your selfishness is going to destroy this family's one chance at happiness." I deleted them all without a flicker of emotion. I arrived at the convention center and slipped in through a side entrance, using the staff credentials Miss DeLuca had arranged. I found my spot in the wings of the main stage, hidden in the shadows, my heart a slow, steady drumbeat against my ribs. I could see the auditorium filling up. It was a sea of dark suits and expectant faces, investors, journalists, rivals, all gathered to witness the anointing of the tech world's new king. I saw Sarah Jenkins in the third row, her laptop open, her expression neutral. I saw Dr. Eris Thorne and the other key engineers sitting together, a small, tense island in the crowd. They had gotten the message. Then the lights dimmed. A slickly produced video played on the massive screen, filled with dramatic music and graphics of soaring data streams, all culminating in the Sterling Dynamics logo. The host walked on stage and began the introduction, his voice booming with superlatives. A visionary, a maverick, the man who is single-handedly about to change the world as we know it. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Sterling Dynamics, Vincent Sterling. The applause was thunderous. Vincent walked out into the spotlight, and he was radiant. He soaked it in, waving to the crowd, a picture of confident, easy brilliance. He found the camera, gave a little wink, a wink he had told me was for me, and began to speak. He was good. I had to give him that. He was a phenomenal performer. He paced the stage with a practiced, casual grace, telling a story about the power of innovation, the importance of dreaming big. He wove a compelling narrative about his own journey, the years of struggle, the lonely nights spent toiling over complex formulas. He was building his own myth right there on stage, and the audience was captivated. "The V-Core battery isn't just a product," he said, his voice ringing with passion. "It's a philosophy. It's the idea that human potential should never be limited by a cord or a plug." It came to me in a flash of inspiration, a moment of true clarity. He was approaching the crescendo. This was it. I took a deep breath, my phone in my hand, a moment where I realized that the future of energy wasn't about more power, but about a different kind of power, a smarter kind. It was a legacy I knew I had to build. I typed the word, "now," and hit send. As he paused for effect, basking in the glow of the stage lights, I stepped out of the shadows and walked calmly onto the stage. He saw me first. His confident smile faltered, his eyes widening in confusion and dawning horror. "Alyssa, what are you doing?" The microphone picked up his panicked whisper. The audience murmured, confused by the interruption. I walked to the spare lectern on the other side of the stage and picked up the microphone. My hand was perfectly steady. "My name," I said, my voice clear and amplified, filling the vast hall, "is Alyssa Vance." I paused, letting my name hang in the air. "And I am the daughter of Arthur Vance, the true inventor of the V-Core battery." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. In the third row, I saw Sarah Jenkins hit the publish key. All around the room, phones began to buzz and vibrate, a digital shockwave spreading through the crowd. Vincent stared at me, his face ashen. The color had drained from his handsome features, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. And then, the image on the giant screen behind him flickered. The Sterling Dynamics logo vanished, replaced by a grainy but unmistakable photograph. My father, Arthur, standing proudly in his workshop, a younger, happier man, surrounded by his tools and his dreams. Then the screen changed again, displaying a high-resolution image of the file directory from the Prometheus floppy disk, the creation dates glowing like accusations. "For the last year," I continued, my voice calm and measured, my gaze locked on the audience, "I have had the unique and painful experience of watching the man I was supposed to marry build an empire on a foundation of lies, lies he stole from my father's grave. I laid it all out. The story of my father, the brilliant but unsung inventor, the Prometheus project, the stolen disc. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts were a sledgehammer. Mr. Sterling is a gifted salesman, I said, turning my head to look directly at him. He flinched as if I'd struck him. But he is not an inventor. His only true innovation is the audacity of his fraud, a fraud that extends beyond my father. I'm sure a man named Ben Carter, his former partner, would be happy to corroborate his history of stealing other people's work. Phones were now held up all over the room, recording. The murmuring had become a roar. Vincent opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was imploding in front of the entire world. The patent application he filed last week is a fraudulent document, I announced. The intellectual property for this technology belongs to the estate of Arthur Vance, and as the executor of that estate, I am here to reclaim it. On cue, Dr. Eris Thorne stood up in the audience. Then the 4 other engineers stood with her. It was a silent, powerful statement of allegiance. The tide had turned, visibly and irrevocably. Sterling Dynamics, as of this moment, is an insolvent company built on stolen property, I declared. But the technology is real, and it will be brought to the world by a new company, a company that will honor the man who actually created it. It will be called Vance Legacy Innovations. 2 large security guards were now walking purposefully onto the stage towards Vincent. He looked from them to me, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The god of the tech world had been exposed as a common thief. His reign was over, as they flanked him and began to escort him off the stage. Past me, his eyes met mine. They were filled not with remorse, but with a venomous, pathetic hatred. I was left alone on the stage. A wave of stunned silence washed over the auditorium, followed by a few hesitant claps, which then swelled into a roar of applause. It wasn't for me, not really. It was for the story, for the truth, for the satisfying, brutal spectacle of justice. I stood there, under the hot, bright lights, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of my father's legacy settle onto my shoulders. It wasn't a burden, it was a mantle. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media frenzies. Vincent Sterling became an overnight pariah. The story was everywhere, a sensational tale of high-tech fraud and graveyard theft. He was hit with a tidal wave of lawsuits from his investors, seeking to claw back their millions. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office launched its own investigation, and federal fraud charges were imminent. His face, once plastered on magazine covers as a visionary, was now the face of disgrace. He had flown to the sun, and his wings, made of stolen wax and feathers, had melted completely. My family did not handle the fallout with grace. Their reaction was a predictable, pathetic cocktail of denial, rage, and self-pity. My mother left me a string of voicemails, her voice cracking with fury. "How could you do this, Alyssa? You didn't just ruin Vincent. You ruined us. We were going to be respected. We were going to be comfortable. You threw it all away for some misplaced loyalty to your father's dusty old hobbies." She never once acknowledged the theft, the lie, the profound disrespect to her late husband's memory. Her grief wasn't for the truth, but for the loss of her ticket to a life of vicarious success. Marcus was even more direct. His texts were short and venomous. "You destroyed my future. I hate you." He saw the world in simple terms. He had been promised a life of ease, and I had taken it away. The concept that it had never been his to begin with was beyond his comprehension. I read their messages, not with anger or hurt anymore, but with a kind of clinical detachment. I saw them for what they were, small, grasping people, so blinded by the glare of what they wanted that they couldn't see the truth of what they had. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Their world had been built on Vincent's lie, and when the lie collapsed, so did their world. That was a consequence of their own making, not mine. I made one concession. Through Miss DeLuca, I arranged for a small anonymous stipend to be sent to my mother each month, enough to cover her basic living expenses, nothing more. It wasn't an act of forgiveness, or even kindness, really. It was a practical matter. It was to ensure she could never claim destitution and try to drag me into some public, messy legal battle. It was a firewall. Chloe had argued against it, saying they deserved nothing, and a part of me agreed with her. But another part of me, the part that still remembered a mother who once packed my lunches, and a brother who once taught me how to ride a bike, couldn't bring myself to watch them become homeless. It was a debatable choice, I know. Some might call it weakness, others a sign that I was better than them. I'm still not sure what it was. All I know is that the boundary was absolute money. Yes, me, no. The emotional bank account was permanently closed. My focus was on the future, on building something real from the wreckage. Vance Legacy Innovations was born. Dr. Eris Thorne became my partner and CEO, her genius for science now paired with my vision for my father's legacy. The investors who had sued Vincent, after their initial fury, saw an opportunity. They had invested in the technology, after all, and the technology was sound. After a series of intense negotiations, most of them reinvested in the new company, now on solid legal ground. I didn't try to run the company day to day. I'm an architect, not a tech CEO. My role was chairman of the board and majority shareholder. My mission was to be the guardian of the company's soul, to ensure it never lost sight of my father's original dream. Innovation not for profit's sake, but for humanity's. A few months after the summit, I was standing in my father's workshop. It was different now. I had used some of my new resources to have it professionally restored. The dust was gone, the tools cleaned and organized, the old equipment carefully preserved. It was no longer a tomb of failed dreams, but a museum celebrating a quiet genius. Chloe was with me, leaning against a newly cleaned workbench. "He would be so proud of you, Eli," she said softly. I picked up a small framed photograph from the desk. It was the one that had been on the screen at the summit, of my father, young and hopeful. "I think he would be," I said. "I think he'd be sad. It came to this, but he'd be proud." I finally understood his letter. The legacy wasn't the battery, it was the spirit. It was about an integrity. It was about knowing the difference between what something is worth and what it costs. It was never about the money, not really. It was about the truth. It was about taking back a story that had been stolen. Some legacies are written in ink on a patent application, but my father's was written in code on a forgotten disk, and I was the only one left who knew the password. Exposing Vincent wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was accepting the truth about my own family, and learning to build a new life with the ghosts of the old one. It was a bittersweet victory, a quiet resolution. I had lost a fiancé and a family, but I had reclaimed my father, and in the process, I had finally found myself. So I want to ask you, have you ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to have someone else try to take the credit? Have you ever been made to feel that your contributions were less important than someone else's ambition? It's a quiet kind of heartbreak, one that's easy for the world to overlook. Let me know your story in the comments below. I think we all have a story about fighting to be seen, and I'd love to hear yours. And if you want to hear more stories about people who finally got the justice they deserved, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.